Election, your BBC.
What are the most important issues, election issues where you live? Now on BBC One, voters get their chance to grill leading politicians as polling day approaches.
Travel, expenses, just adds up. Can't live.
Now I'm worried about their school.
Negotiations on Brexit that really safeguard the economy.
Housing, yeah, is a major issue. I still live at home with my parents. Not enough funding for the NHS.
Good evening. Here we are with a panel of leading London politicians and an audience, as you can hear, very enthusiastic, really champing at the bit. Let's go to our first question from Kazim Azid.
Hi there. Unfortunately, over the last few weeks and months, we've seen some truly disgusting attacks occurring both in London and also in Manchester, which is where I'm originally from. This has unfortunately left myself feeling very scared, and as I'm sure many other individuals in the audience, scared about the prospect of further attacks taking place. Therefore, I'd like to ask today, what policies will the parties here today be introducing to prevent against any further attacks, both in London but also across the UK?
Kazim, thank you. And Diane Abbott, we'll start with you. What do you do?
I think, as you said, the most important thing is to keep people safe. And one of the policies that's in our manifesto is to recruit 10,000 more police officers. And we're doing that because actually, under Theresa May's watch, we have lost 20,000 police officers. And although you might say, what have police officers got to do with fighting terrorism? I think community policing is a way of getting that information that can help us.
How many for London, by the way, of the 10,000?
I'm not sure how many for London. That'll be a matter. The amount people have in their police area will be a matter for the Chief Constable and the PCC.
But would London get half of them, say?
It's a matter of the Chief Constable.
He decides, really?
I just want to go forward and talk about the government's anti-terrorism strategies. And I want to talk about prevent.
Okay, no, hang on. Can we stick on police numbers just while we get some other answers, Diane, before we go back? Prevent is important, of course. Gavin Barwell, they're going to buy more police officers than you are, aren't they?
Well, we're very clear that we're going to protect the police budget, and actually numbers in London have not gone down. We're putting extra officers into MI5 and MI6 and GCHQ.
Gone down since 2010.
No, the numbers are going to go up there by nearly 2,000 extra officers. You know, and there's a clear choice here at this election. Jeremy Corbyn, as leader of the Labour Party, has voted against every single piece of anti-terrorism legislation, not just under this government, but under previous Labour governments. Diane herself actually has previously suggested that we should abolish MI5. So on security of this election, there is a very clear choice between...
Go on, Diane.
Jeremy Corbyn.
I'm not sure whether Gavin was in Parliament at the time, but much of that anti-terrorism legislation, which Jeremy and I voted against, was also voted against by the Conservative Party. Theresa May voted against the 2005 Prevention of Terrorism Act. She voted against ID cards, and she voted against control orders without proper court supervision. And the point is this. It's easy to list legislation that people voted on, but that legislation that myself and a lot of the Tory party voted against, we felt was counterproductive, learning the lesson from Northern Ireland.
All right, quickly, Gavin.
Legislation has Jeremy voted for?
We voted for, because there was an attempt to have 90-day detention without trial, we voted against that. 42-day detention without trial, we voted against that. But we voted for 28-day detention because we thought that was reasonable.
Let's just go back, remember Kazim's question, and Vince Cable, how do we stop what happened in Manchester happening again?
Well, you need very strong security services. They have been effective in the past. Large numbers of potential attacks have been foiled, and we need to give them our full support. It's worth remembering that the former head of MI6, SIS, John Soares, and the head of MI5, John Evans, warned before these outrages the risk, if we left Europe, of the breakup of the sharing of intelligence with other European countries, because this is not just a British phenomenon.
OK, Peter Whittle now looks quite furious.
So we have to have that degree of cooperation.
You know full well that that kind of intelligence is always shared as a matter of course anyway. It's nothing to do with Brexit. I think to add Brexit into this is really distasteful.
Well, I brought it in because the two retiring heads, and they were there when I was a member of the Cabinet, went out of their way to warn. And we should be listening to this.
This is outrageous.
Sean Berry.
I mean, the question was, you know, how do we stop people feeling scared of more attacks coming? And when you see things like what happened in Manchester, when you hear about what happened in Westminster, all of us travelling on the tube every day, it is really hard not to feel scared. We need to make sure people feel reassured that everything is being done. And what I think is that the police need more resources, but it's really important where those resources go. Police have been warning about cutbacks to community policing. They say specifically that the best intelligence comes from communities, not from things like blanket surveillance, but from police firmly rooted in communities who can be called upon when people seem to be starting to go wrong. And the prevent strategy doesn't currently do that.
Let's bring Kazim back, because you
give resources to the police.
OK, Kazim, you asked the question. Do you find any of this convincing?
I would just like to talk about police numbers for a second. I mean, I'm no expert on this. It's not my field of work. But the two police constables or commissioners came out after the wake of the Manchester attack and said that this was not responsible due to a lack of resources. So I think it's incorrect to push a political message over the misery of other people. I don't think that's correct.
There are 32,000 police officers in London, and down from a high in 2010 of about 33,000.
But the numbers doing community policing, they have dropped. We've seen cutbacks from where we used to have 3 officers and 3 PCSOs in every single council ward. Up until recently, the mayor's now doubled it, but we only had 1. And I'm a local councillor, and I know the lack of contact there was. The police officer that we had was changing every 6 months.
Gavin Barwell, can you answer this?
With the community.
Well, so the police numbers in London have held up, and over the course of 2015 to 2020, the comprehensive spending review protects police funding. Actually, Labour's position in the run-up to that spending review, Andy Burnham was arguing for a 10% reduction in the police budget. So it is very important that we retain police resources.
You need more than that.
We get resources into our security services.
We have budgeted for 20,000 policemen. You might like to write these figures down, Diane. That will cost about 1.3 billion, which we've costed. Right, but it's not just about that. It's about 23,000 jihadists now in Britain who've either been under surveillance now or in the past. What has to happen is people are amazed that, for example, the attacker in Manchester can go out of the country and then come back in and have an attack. There is obviously a lack of will. We've got to have a proper border force. We would have 4,000 more people in the border force.
I don't know whether it's 23,000, but there's certainly talks of 500 active investigations, 6,000 people who should be on a list. What do you think, madam, about how you deal with those people?
I mean, I want to know when we're going to stop selling arms to Saudi Arabia and stop exporting what terrorism all around the world. I think that's our biggest issue here. I mean, President Trump is curtsying to the Saudis and making an absolute fool of himself, and we're America's biggest allies. They're laughing at us.
OK. This gentleman here with the beard, just in the second row back. You say what you think should be done. Remember, we're talking about wider measures to stop terrorism that go beyond police numbers, which we discussed.
Well, I mean, going beyond police numbers, I mean, the point is about this bomber, he was a Libyan. I'm Libyan heritage as well. And I can tell you that a real problem is to do with foreign policy. Libya in 2011, when essentially there was a bombing campaign to get rid of Gaddafi. What happened was it was great in one sense, Gaddafi is removed, but then it left a chaotic country, and then you had thereafter basically ISIS growing up, certain kinds of jihadi groups. Basically the whole country was left in tatters, and that was due to the Conservative Party.
Well, the
Conservative government was the one that left this mess.
Gavin Barwell, does your party accept that some of the things that were done, the bombing campaign in Libya, for example, may be in the background, may be to blame?
So I think that these foreign policy questions do pose real difficulties, because we intervened in Libya because Gaddafi was about to murder thousands of innocent civilians. And I think the same issue we have in Syria now, we see what the Assad regime is doing, and we've stood by and allowed it to happen.
Let him answer.
But there is a real challenge about what you then do to reconstruct afterwards, and I would absolutely accept the point the gentleman is making, that we've not
Diane
done a good
Abbott,
job on that.
Jeremy Corbyn was making this point the other day, and...
What Jeremy Corbyn didn't acknowledge is that if you take Afghanistan, if we'd not intervened at all there, we would have allowed a terrorist organisation free space. And
Diane
we can't
Abbott.
do that.
First of all, let me say, the way that you don't make people feel safer is by stigmatising entire communities. That is not the way... On the question of the relationship between some of our international interventions, like Iraq, like Afghanistan, like Libya, and the terror we see on our streets, of course, the people responsible for the terrorism are murderous, violent jihadists. But there is no question that the war in Iraq, the intervention in Libya, left that region a more unstable place and literally left failed states in which jihadis can organise.
So
And I'm not saying this. Eliza Manningham Buller, the former head of MI5, said...
But it was Labour who went to war, wasn't it?
Well, I didn't vote for it, as you may know.
You have consistently given succour to terrorists. The fact is that with this, can you tell me, in Sweden there was a terrible attack recently. What was it about Swedish foreign policy that brought that attack on?
Let me bring in Vince Cable.
You're doing their job for them.
Vince Cable.
There is a massive difference between looking for explanations, and foreign policy may be part of that, and providing excuses and justification. And there is absolutely no justification and excuse for resort to terrorism against innocent civilians, whatever the underlying cause of the instability. The distinction must be made absolutely clear.
OK, so you don't think about the wars in the background here? That's not the issue?
Well, indeed.
It's just a policing
voted
matter.
against the Iraq War, and one of the reasons I did so was because of the warnings we were given was that it would stir up instability and promote terrorism. People like Boris Johnson acknowledge that publicly.
Sian Berry, to what extent do you say it wasn't just that person, it was something else going on behind them?
I mean, I think we're fighting something that's really terrifying. It's like a fire, so we have to be removing the fuel from the fire. And I think, you know, there's no question that, you know, the flames, that we need to be investigating and condemning the people who do the crimes. But the region is a mess, and we have to take our responsibility for the mess that we caused. You know, like Jeremy Corbyn, like Vince, it was on Stop the War marches, and it's one of the key things that we put into all our leaflets right back in 2003. If you do this, you'll create instability in the region, it'll create room for jihadists, and that's what's happened.
Look, but I have to... Look, when you talk about this, it is actually excusing them in a way, even though it's done very nicely. These people, these jihadists, right, and people in ISIS, what they do, they throw guys like me, gay guys like me, off of buildings. What's that got to do with foreign policy? What has it got to do with the way that they treat women? Nothing.
All right, I want to move on to another subject, please. And we'll move on to housing if we can. I know that's quite a big jump from what we've just been discussing. But Charlie Crossfield, you've got a question.
Thanks, Jeremy. I'm currently spending a large amount of my income on rent. I'd really like to purchase property in London, and I'm trying to save for deposits, but buying always seems out of reach. What would your government do to help people like me get on the property ladder?
What's your job, Charlie?
I'm a management consultant.
So and what sort of age are you, can I ask?
I'm 25.
To a 25-year-old management consultant, and you can't see yourself ever buying a house?
Eventually, yes, but I think prices at the moment in London are so high that it's hard to consider.
Well, we've got the Minister of Housing here. He might never buy a house.
So, Charlie, I wake up every day thinking about what I can do to help people like you in London. This problem...
Why does that get a laugh? I don't know.
This problem has been 30 or 40 years in the making. Governments of both colours have not built enough homes, and that's what's fundamentally made housing less affordable. So there is a long-term solution, which is to build the homes that we desperately need, homes of all kinds. And our manifesto has a higher house-building target than the Labour manifesto has.
You have been in power for quite a while,
We have,
and Boris Johnson was mayor as well, and then people say...
Jeremy, it's really important to be honest about this. So we inherited a house-building level across the country of about 130,000 a year, and we've got it up to about 190,000 a year. So we've made progress, but I absolutely accept it is not good enough, and we need to do better.
And in London?
And likewise in London, the figures are up, but they're not good enough, and they need to be higher. So the long-term solution, Charlie, is to build the homes that are desperately needed, but in the short term, we need to help people right now. So banning letting agents from charging upfront fees to tenants to help people like you in the private rented sector, starter homes, shared ownership, schemes like that that can help, the Help to Buy scheme in London that can help people get on the ladder. It is a huge, task that we have to make up for this failure over 30 or 40 years. And I can tell you the Prime Minister is personally committed to ensuring that people like you that are working hard, doing the right thing, should have the chance to own your own home.
OK, I'm just trying to read Charlie's expression, but I'm not sure whether you feel it's not going to happen or it is.
I feel like things like banning letting fees are important, but they're plasters on a bigger issue. I see a lot of very expensive homes being built. I don't see enough affordable homes being built.
OK. Vince Cable, you know London well. What needs to happen to allow a 20-something to buy a house? It doesn't sound like that big a problem, does it?
Well, you need a massive increase in supply. That's a fundamental problem. I think in the past we've relied too heavily on the private sector to do this alone, and they will only build if rents and house prices are going up. So you do need the public sector to be more engaged. We need councils to be building houses again for rent and sale. And to do that, they need to have more freedom to borrow. We're in a ridiculous situation in the country at the moment where councils can borrow money to invest in commercial property speculation in other parts of the country, but they're not allowed to borrow to build houses. Completely insane. I think,
and again, you were in power. I mean, with great respect, you and
indeed.
They were both, when you had that was your chance to do it.
Indeed, and we should have done a great deal more. I accept that. There are other things happening, particularly in the rented sector. For example, there are large amounts of developments going up along the river in London. They're unoccupied. They're going to remain unoccupied. It's just investment property. It's not for the likes of you. And we've got to have some kind of control on that by having a penal council tax on properties that are not used, and equally stopping letting agents from advertising overseas before they can advertise in the UK.
Diana, but how is it...
abuse of the market.
How is it that we've got a situation where a flat is built and someone in Singapore buys it, they have no intention of living in it at all, it's simply an investment vehicle, they're not even going to let it out? How does that happen?
Well, it's because of deregulation, in my view. But just to say that you've raised a very important point. You have to have a salary of £59,000 to afford to rent anything in zones 1 and 2. And it's not just a problem for you, it's a problem for employers. NHS in London has the highest turnover of anywhere in the country because nurses, doctors, professional people on reasonable salaries cannot afford to live in London.
So what do you do?
There are three things, I think. We do have to look at this question of people buying from overseas, buying off-plan and leaving it empty. I live in Dalston. Once upon a time, Dalston was a very kind of regular place. I've got tower blocks now, and at night-time, there are no lights on because they've all been bought from overseas.
But how do you stop it? But how do you stop that? Everyone says it's a problem. There's one in Vauxhall, apparently. The lights are out all through the winter. How do you stop it?
Well, as Vince says, we need to work in London with the Mayor of London and look at what can be done.
But he's Labour.
I know. That's why we're going to work with him, particularly when we win on June the 8th. So...
Yeah, well, no one...
But also, we want to look at the levels of rent, because the levels of rent are astronomical, and we are looking at some type of rent control. And the other thing is to build more houses, as we've heard. But, you know, when the Tories talk about building houses and they talk about affordable houses, I tell you, a penny to a pound, those houses are not affordable to most of the people in this audience.
OK, but I'm still... let's just focus on this foreign... No one has yet solved this issue of the foreign investor who's not going to live here. How, just quickly, Diane, tell us how you do it. How you stop a Russian buying a flat in London and he's not going to actually live in it?
Well, first of all, you have to work with developers to stop them. Some developers advertise these places overseas and have sold them all off-plan. They need to offer them to people in London first.
Right. Sian Berry, what do you think?
This idea of selling off-plan to foreign investors, that's part of the economics of how big developers work now at the moment. All developments in London are doing. And I'll tell you what, far too many developments that used to be council estates are doing this too. Councils in London have knocked down 8,000 council homes in recent years, and they've not rebuilt them. We need to be doing more to relax the borrowing rules on councils. We need to put more grants in place so that councils and housing associations have a different economic model. They're not putting lots and lots of private flats into all of their developments, but they can focus on social rented flats and on living rent flats.
Why not
and just to say,
free up space by building on the Greenbelt? Why not do it?
There is plenty of space in central London at the moment.
Is there?
There is lots of brownfield land. There is lots of infill land that we can use.
Brownfield land's got hospitals on a lot of it.
The very last thing we should do is touch the green belt. But can I talk about rents for a second? Because, actually, for the homes we already have, if we built hundreds and thousands of new homes that people could afford, that would barely dent. There's 2.3 million private renters. I'm one of them in London. Until recently, I've really struggled to pay my rent as well. And the only thing that's really going to help the existing people in London to pay their rent and save up for a deposit is the power to do rent controls. And the mayor needs that power. The government's not allowing him to have that power. I'm not even sure that Sadiq Khan's tried that hard to get it, but it's absolutely vital.
Let me go back to the audience here. And in the front row, you've been waiting patiently to ask or say something about housing.
So despite everything that's been said by the five of you, I still don't believe that I could buy a house in London. And I don't think this could happen now, in the next 5 years or in the next 10 years.
Can I ask how old you are?
I'm 23.
23 and working as?
A customer advisor.
Customer
I graduated
advisor.
last year, so I do have all that debt as well.
All right. We're taking the average 23-year-old customer advisor. Who thinks that that person, you or somebody like you, will never be able to buy a house in London? Who thinks that they will... Don't look round. It's not everybody. Some people think that you will. Anyone want to say why you think she will? Yes, at the back, yeah. Gentleman with the beard there. Yeah. You think yes or no?
No, she won't be able to.
She won't be able to, OK. OK, this gentleman right in the far corner here. You do?
Right. I think, I mean, obviously, as politicians, and, you know, I've been listening to this debate for long. You know, as a politician, what are you going to do to make sure young individuals are going to afford properties? Because you can sit there and talk and talk and talk. Labour's done the same thing. Liberal Democrats do the same thing as well. We've got high rents, high mortgages. What are you going to do about the properties?
All right, let me go back. Just before you answer, sorry, I want to just take some more comments from the audience. You've had your hand up for most of the programme, sir. Here we go. This gentleman here, we're with a tie. Always impressed with a tie.
Thanks, Jeremy. Just for the information given, your mayor, Boris Johnson, when he's on power, London's houses affordability, in terms of affordability, do you know what's the percentage of houses being made as affordable? It's only 13%. So it's completely a gimmick to hear Tories, they are in it for everybody else.
All right. Well, yes, the affordable housing isn't affordable. That's the charge.
So this term affordable housing is used to mean different things. So it's used by housing professionals to mean council or housing association homes. So if we're talking about that, we've just given Sadiq, the mayor, £3.15 billion. And he himself says, you can go and look it up, that is the largest amount of money London has ever had for that kind of housing. But Charlie's question was a different, the gentleman at the back's question was a different one, which is how do we make housing in general for private rent, for people to buy, more affordable? And the only answer to that, ultimately, is to build enough homes so that supply keeps up with demand. And that is why, that is the crucial question. And as I said, if you compare our manifesto, you can go away tonight and have a look, with Labour's manifesto, we are offering a higher level of house building than Jeremy Corbyn.
OK, Charlie, could you pick between these answerers, or is it just very, very bleak?
I find it quite difficult. And also, speaking on behalf of a few of my friends, having seen house prices rise so much above earnings growth rates for the last many years, a lot of my friends are concerned about buying now for fear of a crash and going into negative equity. So even the ones that can afford it, they're scared to go into the market because of the situation. OK,
Charlie, thank you. That's a good starter on housing. We may never get to the end of housing. We're going to talk about Brexit now. And Troy, where's Troy Kennedy? Your question on Brexit, Troy.
Yeah, 60% of Londoners voted to remain in the European Union, including myself. And many of us feel forgotten about. So what would your party do to ensure that London's interests are being considered in the upcoming Brexit negotiations?
So Britain is Brexit, London is Remain. Vince Cable, what needs to happen?
Well, I think we have to start by saying that the hard, extreme kind of UKIP style of Brexit, which the government is committed to, taking us out of the single market, the customs union, is potentially enormously damaging, and we must try to stop that. It's particularly damaging for London for a whole host of reasons. The financial services industry, which is fundamental here, provides the tax base of the city, is going to migrate out because they don't have single-mark passporting rights. We have these wonderful universities and research centres that are going to lose their European money. We're going to lose access to the European Investment Bank that's fund all the big public transport infrastructure. We've got, I think, a quarter of all the top 250 companies in the world are headquartered here specifically because they see Britain as a gateway to Europe. And if we have a serious disruption of our trade, particularly the breaking up of the customs union, a lot of those companies are going to go. So the impact on London is massive.
But isn't that the argument you lost last year?
No, we haven't lost the argument. The referendum has happened. The vote's taken place.
It's gone.
There are different ways of leaving the European Union. You can do it in the hard, extreme way that this government has chosen. We didn't have to leave the single market. We don't have to leave the customs union. We don't have to break up all the collaborative relationships around research, which is what will happen if we have a bad deal or we have no deal, which Theresa May is committed to, and we must try to avoid that.
Peter Whittle, you want a hard Brexit. You want to be out tomorrow, don't you, basically?
No. This thing about hard Brexit, soft Brexit, now it's become extreme Brexit and it's become UKIP Brexit. There is just Brexit. And when people voted last year, they knew what they were voting for. The assumption behind all of my colleagues here all voted to remain, right? I'm the only one who voted for Brexit, is that basically people were too stupid when they were given the choice. And the fact is, I don't think people are stupid. They were told very clearly it means leaving the single market. It means an end to free movement. That is the reason that people mostly voted for it in the country. I admit in London, it was 60%, but there were 40% of Londoners who still voted to leave. All that Vince is doing is like, this is like Project Fear 3.0. This is replaying the whole thing.
Yes, lots of people want to talk about this. The gentleman here wearing the glasses, if you don't mind me saying so.
I'm sorry, but there were numerous different people from different parties who were backing Brexit, who were coming out with different things. So you can't say that people knew exactly what Brexit was about. Because I know
it was the same
Conservative minister actually said that if we left the European Union, that we would stay in the single market. There was so many different bits of information that no one knew.
Thank you. Anyone here think that you voted out, but thinking we could stay in the single market? Is there... Nobody. OK. Yes, you want to speak?
I think the Brexit debate has really typified the ineptitude of so many elected politicians. There's no hard Brexit, it's just Brexit. What does that mean? Red, white and blue Brexit? What does that mean?
It means controlling our own borders. It means controlling our own laws. It's all the things that people voted for, very clearly.
Until the countries that you want to make trade deals with say, well, we want visa access for our people. You have no strategy. None of you on this stage have a coherent strategy. That's what affects Londoners, and that's why we're at risk.
OK, this lady here, what's your question?
We were also told it meant £350 million a week for our NHS.
I can just explain that we thought that was wrong. That was the Tory campaign. That was the Tory campaign. Vote Leave, put that on the bus. That was never right. That was never right. Our figure was, in UKIP, was 250 million, which is actually the correct amount. No one disputes. That was the Tory campaign, Vote Leave, and they were wrong.
OK, gosh. You didn't go and lie down in front of that bus with the 350 million on, did you?
No, wait a minute. Nigel was very clear, Nigel Farage at the time, that this was an incorrect figure.
The day after, yeah. OK. Gavin Barwick, you will Remain, were you?
I was.
Right, and aren't you a bit embarrassed now to be part of this pro-Brexit government?
No, because I said very clearly before the referendum that I would respect the result. But I don't think anyone's actually answered Troy's question. So he was saying that he was a Remain voter and he's feeling ignored, essentially. So I hope you don't feel like that. I think what's really important now is that we respect the result and we try and bring the country back together. And that means addressing the things that led people to vote Leave, but trying to preserve some of the things that those of us that voted Remain liked about the institution. And where I disagree with Vince, and we were on the same side in the referendum, you know, if you stay in the single market and you stay in the customs union, that isn't Brexit at all. You've still got free movement. You've still got the EU making laws that we wouldn't have a say in, and you can't do any trade deals with any other countries. That's not Brexit. So it's no good as a country if we just spend the whole next year arguing about the referendum that we had last year. We've got to bring the country together and we've got to get the right Brexit deal.
Why don't you say to EU nationals who are working in London that they can stay? Why don't you say that? You're the only party not saying it.
So we absolutely want them to stay. We have a duty as a government both to look after EU citizens who've been living here and contributing to our great city and to look after British citizens that are in EU countries. But the key choice at this election, these negotiations are going to start, Troy, a few days after the general election. And the question is, who do you want leading those negotiations? Do you want Theresa May or do you want Jeremy Corbyn? That is the key question at this election.
OK. Well, Diane Abbott, you, Labour, have conceded that free movement will end. And your party seemed to say it through gritted teeth. Why did you say that?
Because...
It's not what you believe.
No, free movement is a function of being in the EU. If we're not in the EU, free movement ends. But to go back to the question, there are over 1 million EU nationals living in this country, living in London. And the Labour Party does not believe that we should use them as bargaining chips in a negotiation. We believe that we should straight away say that we will secure their position. And it's not just because it's a human rights issue. Those EU nationals are working in our hospitals, they are working in social care.
Anyone in this room in that position?
They're working in financial services.
OK,
And then some
maybe
of them
not.
have British partners and British children. So that's the first thing we would do.
Would you do that, Sian Berry?
Absolutely. I mean, I think...
You'd guarantee their place?
Absolutely.
And lose the bargaining chip?
I'm ashamed that we haven't got further in nearly a year in terms of negotiations. I mean, Vince is right to list all those things that we might lose. The negotiations are going to be really, really intricate. And yet every time you raise, well, OK, what are we going to do about EU nationals? What are we going to do about science funding? You say that to somebody who's Leave, and all they do is shout back the slogans at you as if you're having the debate again. But actually, we need to be talking much more about the details. I'll tell you who I want negotiating Brexit. I want Caroline Lucas negotiating Brexit. She was an MEP for 10 years. She hasn't got a massive chip on her shoulder, and she can just go out there and actually try and get the best deal for us in Europe. But once we do know what that deal is, I think we need to have a second referendum. Not the same question, a ratification referendum, once we know what the deal is, because it's true.
Who's
we
Brexit
didn't know
here?
what we were voting
Thank you,
for.
Sian.
Exactly.
Who's Brexit here? Put your hand up if you're Brexit. Let's see. OK, the gentleman in the jacket just at the end of the row.
Yeah, I think you're all living in cuckoo land if you think we're going to throw all the EU citizens out when we make the Brexit move. I don't know where you come from.
OK.
Where do you come from? We're not going to throw them out, Diane.
Reassurance. And the government could give them reassurance, and it refuses to do so.
No.
OK, anyone else
we are not
Brexit here?
throwing anyone out the country.
Who voted Brexit here? You did, sir? OK, this gentleman here, in the middle with the blue shirt.
I voted for Brexit, and I kind of get that we don't have a complete mandate to leave the single market because it was only won by 2%. But the Greens and the Lib Dems talk about having a second referendum. Talk about having a second referendum. You accept that we left the European Union, but then you want to give us the chance to then remain in the European Union. Surely it should just be deal or no deal, or just no referendum, because you've accepted that we've left, but now you just want us to go back.
It's a totally different question. The public have voted to leave. We haven't got any understanding yet about what the destination is. Let me just make a simple point. Theresa May has said she wants to crash out of the European Union if they can't get a good deal. They may not get a good deal.
Did she use that phrase?
In which case we'll have a chaotic situation in which citizenship is not understood, there are no rules by which business can operate, and under those circumstances the British public should have an opportunity to pass a judgment on what has been agreed.
OK. Question on a different subject from Margaret Fordham, up here. Margaret, another huge subject.
It is, yes. I'm now in my 70s. I've paid my taxes and worked to be able to afford to buy my own home, which is worth over 100,000. I want to leave it to my family, to my son, who's sitting next to me. But if I need care, they might need to sell this house to pay for the care. Is that fair?
Is it fair, Gavin Barwell, that Margaret should have to lose the value in her home to pay for care?
Okay. So the current position, Margaret, if that happened to you right now, is that your house could be eroded in value down to just £23,000. That could be all that you would be able to give on to your son. And what Theresa May is proposing in her manifesto is two things. First of all, to raise that to £100,000. But secondly, we're also saying that there should be a cap on the total contribution you should be able to make. Well, we're going to consult on
Tell us,
that.
there's an election soon. You've got to tell us before the election.
I think it's important to have a proper debate about that and have a consultation. But look, Margaret was asking me a simple question.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that people should be able to leave a significant proportion of what you've worked hard to build up to
wants to get in.
You must know what that cap is, because to be able to work all these figures out, you must know what that is. Yet Theresa May was unable or unwilling to say. My concern is that after caring for my mum, and then perhaps eventually she will have to go into care, she could be in care for years, and eventually I'd have to get a mortgage to live in my own home that we've spent years paying off. I live with my mum.
And you paid some of the mortgage as well,
Yes,
is that right?
indeed.
Yes.
For years we
Yeah,
did.
he
And
has.
when my father died when I was 23, we were left in loads of debt because he had dementia himself. We clubbed together and we paid for the house. We keep the house going. I'm not saying, oh, great, look at me, how dedicated I am. But what I'm saying is we've got a property there which we've spent years looking after. When my mum goes into care, I'm going to have to end up getting a mortgage to live in my own house.
And important to say, although
I'm not alone, and I'm not alone in this either. There are
although
loads of
you
other
say
people in the same
that
situation.
Margaret will be better off with the £100,000 limit, it's not quite true, is it? Because that the value will be taken out when she uses social care in her own home. And that's the big change.
That's really important, because actually at the moment a lot of people are being forced out of their own home. Even if it's a better outcome for them to stay and be cared in their own home, some people are being forced to go into residential care when they don't want to. So that's not a good outcome for people. But look, coming back to the point the gentleman made, people will not have to sell their home at the point someone needs to go into care. I think what you said in your question is exactly right, that people who work hard should be able to pass on a significant proportion of what they've worked hard in their lives to build up to their children.
100,000.
Let me bring
We've been paying that off for years, that property. Weren't the Conservatives and other parties encouraging us all to be aspirational and to own our own homes in order for them to take it back from us almost in their entirety when the person died?
Let me bring in some others.
It will not be taken back from you.
Let me bring
typical London home with a
Hang on.
way that
you can unspin this. This was a humiliating U-turn you've done, and also it shows that the nasty party is still well and truly alive. And the fact is, it is appalling, because the fact is we haven't taken social care for the elderly seriously enough. What we are talking about in my party is putting 1.2 billion purely into social care. We want to integrate the National Health Service and social care and put 1.2 into social care, which we will take from the hugely inflated foreign aid budget. That is where it needs to be with our elderly.
So you're taking the whole of the foreign aid budget?
No, we're going to reduce it from 0.7 right down to 0.2, which is what America spends on it. We're going to put 9 billion of that into NHS and 2 billion into social care.
OK, Sean Berry, what do you think?
That's funny. I think it's a
Sean
great
Berry.
idea.
The Conservatives have made a right mess of this. I mean, I think it is completely wrong to try and take away your home to pay for your care. This is social security. It's one of those things that should be paid for out of things like national insurance. Now, what we do is not reduce national insurance for the better paid. It currently drops at a certain level to a very low level. We think people should carry on paying national insurance and that it should go towards social care. And when it comes to inheritance, we think the money that comes from inheritance should be taxed according to the income of who receives it, not according to the estate that's giving it. I think that would be much, much more fair when you've got people who maybe have, that's their home is their only asset. Their children are poor, their children cannot afford other homes. If those children are not wealthy, they should not be taxed on that inheritance.
Diane Abbott, what about that? Your leader, Tony Blair, who, of course, you're a big fan of, did once say you shouldn't have to sell your home to pay for your care. And I think he got the biggest round of applause he ever had at a party conference. Is that your policy still?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I know people from the inner city who scrimped and saved to buy a house in Gavin's constituency. They did without a lot of things. And to tell them, when they have paid into their national insurance all their life, that they're going to pay this dementia tax, because what is new is you are going to charge this dementia tax. You're going to take people's homes after they've died from people who are getting care in their home. It was always about people that were going into care homes. You have taken this a step further, and you're going to have this dementia tax for people who are just getting carried on.
Diane,
And of course it's
you have
unfair.
you have to raise more tax to do what you want to do, which to have the state pay for it in every case. And therefore I want to just mention this fact that you are going to raise the tax on people earning £80,000 and above. Now, you know, in London, somebody on £80,000 might not even be able to afford to buy a house. That's how crazy the property market is here. So how is it fair to ask them to pay more tax?
The point about... We're only talking about putting income tax on the top 5%. And the point about income tax, consistently applied, it is still fairer than randomly taking the houses of people who happen to have made that investment.
What about inheritance tax? You're going to target a typical London home is going to pay inheritance tax under John McDonnell's proposal.
All right, Vince Cable.
425,000.
I mean, what is so incompetent as well as cruel about what the Conservatives did was that we're getting all this talk about consultation. We've already had one. We spent, I think, 3 years in the coalition consulting. There's a 300-page document drawn up by a man called Dilnot, and we agreed a number, a figure. 72,000. And there was absolutely no reason whatever why the Conservatives couldn't have stayed with that. But there is a separate issue, which links to the issue of taxation, that quite apart from, you know, how you fund long-term personal care, there is a current crisis in actually paying for the domiciliary care services of local councils. They've lost vast amounts of money. Elderly, frail people are having to go into hospital and are staying in hospital. One of the reasons we're arguing that we want ordinary taxpayers to pay a penny in the pound on income tax is partly to support the health service, but partly to support the social care budget, because you have to look at those two things together.
We've got actually in the audience, I think, I don't know if you're retired, Paul, but Paul Saper, Director of... You're not retired yet, even better. And you're Director of Health and Social Care, is that right?
Yes, consulting company. I actually was involved with the Royal Commission on Long-Term Care. Well, I think just to correct it, get the arguments right, it was 14,250 is the actual limit today. Not 23,000, and it was the Liberals and the Conservatives that proposed in the 2014 Act that it should increase to 17,000, if you remember.
Do you see a solution? Can you hear a solution today?
I think what the Prime Minister did was she said, instead of having 14,250, let's have it 100,000. And she also turned around and said that OK, people who are receiving help in their own homes, perhaps they should actually come out of their resources as well. That's about, that's roughly speaking, £200 a week. You've got to spend a lot of 10,000 before you get it. But the question I ask is, when you're sitting there in government and you've got responsibilities and you're looking at the budget for adult social care, what's your priority? You know, is it in this area, or are there other areas of adult social care you prioritise, and how would you pay for it?
Thank you. OK, but I want to hear from the audience, I'm afraid, so we'll come back to that maybe. Yes, what would you like to say?
Hello, I believe the Conservatives have been consulting with insurance companies for months now in regards to the dementia tax. And what I'd like to say is you've done 27 U-turns since your last manifesto. How dare you expect people to implicitly trust you now?
OK, anybody else? Anyone else? There's no obvious... It's not easy, this. There's no obvious solution. Yes, in the tartan shirt.
Oh, yes. Hello. I think it's unfair to completely go on the U-turn, because I think surely if you get bad feedback and you then make changes, surely that's a good thing, not a bad thing. The Conservatives are far from being the only party who have done that.
All right, who asked the question on this? Just remind me, where was our brilliant original question? Yes, Margaret. Yeah. What do you think? You worried about your home, right?
I am. Yes, I am. And I really feel that, you know, for years we've had to work so hard to keep our home. And for this to happen, it's so disappointing, and I'm so disappointed in the Conservatives. Yeah. I really, really am.
Thank you very much. You know what? We're out of time. Thank you, politicians. Thank you, brilliant audience, as well. And, yes, all I should say, really, is that polling takes place on June the 8th. And thank you very much indeed for watching. From all of us here, good night.
Who's saying what?
And why?
Hear the